I don't remember putting those here. Oh, these aren't mine. I wonder whose these are. They say Spartacus on here. Hey, class, who's Spartacus? Whose are these? Seriously, I know I don't have a student named Spartacus, so who wrote this on this bag of mints? I need to know.
I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus? I'm Spartacus.
You know what? Screw it. I'm Spartacus.
What do you mean you didn't get it? You haven't seen Spartacus? Whoosh! Right over your heads. Yeah, it is from an old movie called Spartacus, where a bunch of Roman gladiators try to stand up for their buddy, and they all claim they're Spartacus so that the Roman leaders who are trying to catch Spartacus don't actually know who it is. But it's actually a really good illustration of what happens after Rome falls, where we have all these different people claiming to be Rome. As we've already seen throughout world history, it's been hotly debated about who is the inheritor of the Roman Empire. And so many different people think that they are the continuation of that. We saw this debate between the Byzantine Empire and the Catholic Church. Both of them thought they were a continuation of Rome. And if you were confused already, prepare to get more confused, because a whole other group is going to come in and continue the Byzantine and Roman Empire. And it's probably not who you'd expect. Let's go. If you've been following along throughout Unit 4 in this unit of crises, it's no secret that the Byzantine Empire is not what it once was. It's been on a steady decline since the reign of Justinian. A series of poor rulers has put Byzantium at a crossroads. It's beginning to decline economically as well, and it's going to have its share of foreign invaders.
From 400 all the way to 1500, Constantinople would be constantly attacked by different invading groups, including different Muslim groups like the Umayyads, the Abbasids, and even the Seljuks, as well as other raiders like the Vikings and the Magyars.
It's kind of clear that Byzantium is surrounded with Muslim invaders from the east, plus the fact that they don't really get along with the west. Byzantium's in a bad spot, and that's why they call out for help in 1095 with the start of the Crusade. As we know, those Crusades, which initially were meant to help protect Byzantium and retake the Holy Land, didn't do that. It actually brought more turmoil and destruction to the Byzantines than was originally intended.
The Fourth Crusade resulted in the brutal sack of Constantinople by Christian crusaders in 1204, and this completely decimated Constantinople's infrastructure as well as its economy. It also led to a number of different power struggles that have led to the eventual recapture of Constantinople in 1260.
The sack of Constantinople left Byzantium very weak, and it was also a slap in the face from the West. It ensures that this breakup that happened in the Great Schism, they're never getting back together. And yet, at the same time, it also created all this political turmoil that ensures that Byzantium isn't going to have a lot of structure and safety, just like what we saw at the end of the Roman Empire. And once again, Constantinople will be invaded, this time by an enemy that the Byzantines just can't defeat.
The Byzantine Empire and Constantinople would face its final invaders in 1453 when the new Muslim Ottoman Empire, a Sunni group from Turkey, sieged Constantinople in 1453. The Theodosian walls proved to be strong, yet the introduction of gunpowder allowed for the Ottomans to eventually climb over the walls and defeat the city, officially causing the fall of Constantinople in late 1453. Sultan Mehmed II, the leader of the Ottoman Empire, was now in control of one of the greatest cities of the world, and the once great Christian city now became a center for Islam and for the Ottoman Empire, and it would be renamed Istanbul. And to symbolize their conquest, the Ottomans took the Hagia Sophia, the greatest church in all of Christendom, and turned it into a mosque.
Now, the Ottomans were fairly tolerant of Christians after the conquest of Constantinople. In fact, the Patriarch of Constantinople was allowed to still live in Istanbul, and actually still does today. And we'll talk more about the Ottomans and their efforts to rule these Christian peoples, but that's kind of a story for later on. Byzantium, as we know it, this great empire, this Christian empire that lasted for 1,000 years, its time is done. But as we know with the Roman legacy, it doesn't die easily. It's usually passed on. And in this case, it's passed on to a very unexpected group that actually has a lot of surprising ties to the Byzantines. That group is what we know today as Russia. And before we can break down what the ties are and why they are the inheritors, we got to understand what was going on in Russia up to this point in 1453. Now, if you're like me, when you first hear Russia, you think of three things. Number one, it's cold. It's Russia. It's always cold. Number two, you probably think of big beards. And number three, you probably think of thick Russian accents. That was probably a terrible accent, but I tried. You also need to know that Russia is one of the largest areas of land. It is part of Europe and Asia, and the country itself today is massive, but it wasn't always like that. Geographically speaking, Russia actually has 3 separate areas with 3 really different climates. Now, the European part of Russia is kind of like Wisconsin. A temperate climate that gets really cold in the winter, but pretty pleasant the rest of the year.
The northern portion of Russia is known for its harsh and snowy climate, as well as its dense forests, which do not allow for good farming. Central and southern Russia are made up of a steppe, which is an open, treeless grassland. This was considered to be a highway between Asia and Europe and was ruled mostly by a group called the Mongols.
Unlike many of the other civilizations we've covered in this class, Russia doesn't seem to be all that suitable for a civilization to survive and thrive. And it's really not. There's nothing special about it. In many ways, people consider it to kind of be a frozen wasteland. However, a group of people would eventually end up there. They have a lot of different origins, but they became known as the Rus people, hence the name Russia.
A group of people of Slavic and Viking descent eventually settled in modern-day Ukraine in the city of Kiev. This civilization became known as the Kievan Rus, which is where we get the term Russia from.
By the 800s, Kiev had become an economic power and was on the fringe of the growing Byzantine Empire. And very quickly, it became clear that they would either be an enemy or an ally of the Byzantines. And they quickly did become allies, often rushing to the aid of the Byzantines. But they were tied closer because of their shared faith. Missionaries like Cyril and Methodius had traveled from Byzantium into the Rus people and had brought Eastern Orthodox Christianity. And now suddenly they were attached together. And that especially changed when there was an important marriage and an important conversion of a Rus ruler.
In 987, the Prince of Kiev, Vladimir, married the sister of the Byzantine emperor and also converted to Eastern Orthodox Christianity through baptism. This ensured that all of Kievan Rus was now Christian. Modern Russian alphabet, known as Cyrillic, is a hybrid of Greek languages as well as Slavic tongues, utilized by the missionaries Cyril and Methodius, who converted much of Russia to Christianity for Byzantium. Kiev enjoyed a golden age under Yaroslav from 1019 to 1054 as he ruled in a way that echoed back to Justinian, introducing a new system of coded laws and really trying to build up the Kievan Rus military.
But the Byzantines and the Russians are still 2 very different civilizations. In fact, the Byzantine people often considered the Russians, with their thick beards and outdoorsy attitude, to be kind of culturally backward, even though they embraced the same faith. So then how does Russia continue the legacy of Byzantium? Well, it never really looked like it would happen, especially when invaders came in and conquered much of the Rus population. Yeah, I get it. That's right. Nomadic horse people, they're back, the Mongols. It's during the 1200s that the growing Mongol Empire becomes one of the largest contiguous empires in all of world history and becomes another contributing factor to the ongoing crisis in Europe and ends up conquering all of Russia. We'll talk more about the Mongols in a later video.
After the death of Genghis, his many descendants began to split the Mongol Empire up into smaller khanates. One such khanate was the Golden Horde, which conquered and ruled most of modern-day Russia. Not only did the Mongols burn down and loot Kiev, they also ruled Russia for 240 years and placed heavy taxes on the Christian Russians. However, they were very tolerant of Christianity, which allowed the Russian Orthodox Church to continue to grow. The Mongols also continued the precedent for absolute power that had been used by Byzantine emperors. This precedent would be continued by future Russian rulers as well.
It's the Mongols' tolerance that will be their downfall. See, they allowed many of these local Rus princes to remain in power, most specifically the princes of Muscovy, a powerful trading city in central Russia. You know it better as Moscow. And eventually, as we know historically, people don't like being ruled by somebody else. So eventually these princes come together and unite the Russian population to fight back against the Mongols.
The princes won a major victory at the Battle of Kulikovo in 1380. And after that, a new leader, the Prince of Muscovy, Ivan III, would begin to lead efforts for Russian unification.
Ivan would later become known as Ivan the Great, not only because of his victory over the Mongols, but because he began to unite the Rus people together under one leadership and truly create the state of Russia. Now, within all of this, it's around the same time that the Byzantine Empire is really dwindling. And as Byzantium continues to fall apart and is facing external pressures, the last Emperor of Byzantium, Constantine XI, marries his niece off to Ivan III. And now we have a strict blood connection between Byzantium and the ruler of Russia, which is why eventually, after the fall of Constantinople in 1453, Ivan III would take on a new title.
In 1502, Ivan the Great became the first Tsar of Russia. The word Tsar is a Russian word for Caesar or king, and it echoes back to the Roman Empire, which is why Ivan the Great declared Russia to be the third Rome, echoing back to the term Basileus, which was used by the Byzantine Empire. Because of ties going back to the Byzantine Empire, the Russians truly believed they were the continuation of Rome.
So by the time Constantinople fell in 1453, it was very easy for Ivan the Great to slip in as sort of the next Byzantine emperor. And that's truly how Russia would see themselves. And ever since Ivan, the Tsars ruled in Russia absolutely, just as Byzantine emperors had, and had control of the full Russian Orthodox Church. They really believed they're an extension of the same thing. And the Tsars will become some of the most powerful rulers in all of European history and will remain in control all the way up till the end of World War I, which is really an incredible amount of time.
The power of the Tsar only increased under Ivan IV, also known as Ivan the Terrible. He further centralized the power of the Tsar. He also utilized a system of feudalism to keep the boyars, Russian nobles, in check, giving land to nobles if they gave him military service.
Ivan was kind of a crazy guy, hence the name Terrible. He suffered from awful fits of rage and even killed one of his own sons. He also was so paranoid that he created a secret police force to always be watching people to make sure that he truly had control. Yep, it's basically the KGB. And we'll track more of these czars in Russia's history as we get into the modern era. But in the meantime, we have to understand that Russia is truly a continuation of Byzantium and therefore Rome too. And this is a theme we continue to see throughout world history. For whatever reason, Rome is always emulated. And not just that, different people want to continue that legacy. There's something special, almost magical about the Roman and Byzantine empires that people always want to be connected to. The Russians aren't the first to want that, and they definitely won't be the last. But that's a story for another day. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.